So now we finally get to find out, boy, there's not a lot of pages here. I guess he continues on. Anyway, the positive or the relation of the call of conscience to the what does it call it in the other translation? In the Stambach translation, she calls it the vulgar interpretation of conscience. The everyday, the everyday
The ordinary.
ordinary.
Hmm.
I
And it has in parentheses that so the actual German is uh however you would pronounce it, basically vulgar. It's spelled like vulgar. I think there's
okay.
an umlaut over the A or something, but so that is the German. But yeah, I think it's ordinary interpretation. Yeah. I kind of like vulgar better, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I guess he's using vulgar in the more technical sense of
Hmm.
which I don't know. Anyway, so I don't know where to start. Does someone have someplace to start? I struggled through parts of this. I think I understood bits, not bits and pieces. I understood parts and didn't quite get other parts, and then I had a hard time seeing how all the parts fit together. But I mean, I didn't. It's not like some things where I just have absolutely no clue. I think I have some sense of what he's doing here, but I still found parts of it quite difficult.
Yeah, so some of so we did sections 59 and 60. 59 was about yeah, the stupid vulgar interpretations of the conscience. Unbelievable. But so that section was kind of interesting in that it seemed to cover some of the what do you call it, the ethical considerations, some of them that we've discussed. Um, but some of that section I found somewhere in between difficult to understand and also kind of like I don't care, whatever. But I'm very much willing to admit that's probably just how I felt reading it at that time. As part of my factical ontic experience. So,
It's part of
uh,
your guilt.
yeah, yeah, uh, I guess, yeah. And then but section 60 I thought was really interesting and that it brought all this stuff together. And so, as much as I often will say, um, oh, it's coming up that whoever Heidegger or Spinoza or whoever is going to explain this in the next section or in the next chapter, whatever it is. But I think finally Heidegger is somewhat delivered in giving some answers to things that have been we've been asking like the whole time. Um, so some of the because I think he gives okay, the relation of this is really kind of like the complete concept of authenticity that he's giving. And with that, he somewhat filled in some of the concrete questions that we had about what it means. Like, can you have it and then lose it or things like that? So there's ghost in my room or something. Um, but yeah, I thought that was very interesting. This section 60, putting everything kind of, but he goes through almost the entire book in reiterating everything through this lens of authenticity, ultimately culminating in this concept of resoluteness. So there you go. If you want a short answer quiz, the question is, what is authenticity for Heidegger? Your best one word answer is resoluteness. So yeah, I thought that part was interesting. Yeah.
So then, what is resoluteness?
That's so I think he does give a one sentence definition that's probably not oh yeah, here it is. Um so on Heidegger 297 at the very, very beginning, kind of right where the number is. Um This distinctive and authentic disclosedness, which is attested in Dasein itself by its conscience, this reticent self-projection upon one's own most being guilty, in which one is ready for anxiety, we call resoluteness. I think that's his definition. And so what he's doing there is he's going through kind of this, okay, you get the structure of disclosedness where you've got attunement or a state of mind, understanding, and discourse. So in that definition he's giving, he's touching on all those and kind of saying, okay, all these components of Dasein, there's an authentic aspect to it. And ultimately, all three of those together, that's resoluteness. Reticent self-projection upon one's almost being guilty, in which one is ready for anxiety. So he's got all, so anxiety, that's attunement or state of mind, Befindlichkeit. Uh, Reticent, that's discourse. Self-projection upon one's almost being guilty, that is understanding. Yeah. So there you go. Something like that. And then of course, I mean, most people, if you hear that definition, that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it needs to be, it has this kind of this tripartite structure. So you have to kind of go through each part, show what's going on with that. In which case, so the one that was disclosed to us most recently was the reticence. And, I kind of get it. But at the same time, it's kind of anticlimactic in that it's just like silence, reticence. I kind of get it. So you got okay, the they self with its idle chatter, its idle talk, you know, all absorbed in the lostness of concern and all that good stuff. So what shuts it up is this reticence. So you no longer have all these interpretations being handed to you. Instead, there's a silence there. So you then are forced in some way to come up with it yourself from your own most possibilities, I guess. So I mean, it kind of makes sense, but I don't know. It's kind of I felt like it was just anticlimactic.
I kind of liked it. I mean, I guess, like, would you say that the resoluteness is, I don't know how to describe it, a form of disclosure of conscience for him?
Uh, I could kind of speak on that. I would say just if I may, Chase, if I could kind of hazard an answer and you can tell me if I'm off base. Um, I I think I agree, Chase. It feels almost like the thing Nevitt that you say all the time. It's like the right time at the right place. Being resolute is about having the right idea at the right time in the right sort of way. Like, it's all that stuff doing, and using the right stuff from the they and interpreting it and reincorporating it in the right way. Yeah, that's Aristotle. But there he does give an explanation, I think. At least I thought, I don't know, is he talking about something completely different here? On Heidegger 301, like literally right at the end of the reading, I was flipping through it looking for this sentence, and I guess it's at the end of the reading. Tell me, is he talking about what I think he's talking about, or is he talking about something completely different here? Because it's not the italicized sentence, but the one right after, the first sentence of the paragraph after the italicized sentence, which to me it reads, to present the factical existential possibilities in their chief features and interconnections, and to interpret them according to their existential structure, falls among the tasks of a thematic existential anthropology. Right. Okay. So what is he talking about? Their chief features and interconnections. Who's the there? The chief features and interconnections is he's talking about resoluteness and theoretical and practical behavior and resoluteness as authenticity in that paragraph right before. And what I took that sentence to mean, and again, I might be completely misinterpreting it. I'm totally open to that, but I thought that what he was saying with a thematic existential anthropology was in reference to, like, if you want to get the specifics, if you want to get the some sort of if you want to present the factical existential possibilities, if you want to have an answer per your factical conditions, or if you want to analyze whether or not there was resoluteness or authenticity in this or that moment of disclosure, according to whatever circumstances, it would require a thematic existential anthropology. It's like that's what we would have to do. We would have to, if you want to get specifics, if you want to figure out like answer questions for thought experiments, like, well, would I be resolute if such and such were the case? That would not make sense here. The only way we could figure it out is with like a full thematic existential anthropology, which you can't do on a thought experiment, I don't think. And so he's saying, like, we can't get into that, given that the purposes of the next sentence, the purposes of the present investigation as a study of fundamental ontology. So he's like, this is way more, I'm just trying to lay the groundwork for something like that, rather than, because I thought that's what that meant, thematic existential anthropology. Like, that's what we would have to do if we want to get like specifics for specific cases.
Real quickly, I agree with that part, Hunter. I want to say, like, maybe just to add to that, it seems like the way he set it up, an existential anthropology would answer the questions after an empirical study. Like, it's a historical study of the actual, conditions for heeding the call of conscience, rather than the ontological possibilities for there being a call of conscience whatsoever to even begin with.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was just gonna say, I think the ontology is a prerequisite for that. I think, right? So at least that's what, because he keeps saying, he says a similar thing various places where, well, if you want me to answer this specific question, that's not what I'm doing here. I'm doing ontology, but he seems like if you really want to answer those kinds of questions, I don't know what correctly, I'm not sure what to say, but you need to understand the ontology first. So what he's doing is a prerequisite for the possibility of doing that practical anthropology.
Yeah, I think so. He's talked about in anthropology in a few places, and the way that I interpreted this is that it's not so much having to do exactly with authenticity specifically, because its authenticity is a factical existential possibility for particular Daseins, but there's also other ones too. So I was thinking that this has to do with, okay, you've got Dasein, and this has been an existential analysis of Dasein that is given its existential structure. That structure shows that, it's part of its structure, it's composed of these possibilities, but then the factical existential possibilities in their chief features and interconnections. I think this is kind of something like the various things that humans can do in a more broad, general sort of way, like a real anthropology, or I mean, like a normal anthropology or whatnot, in that it's studying humans, but in this case, according to a kind of general way, but that's still also in line with this existential theory that the existential structures that Heidegger's given us. So, I mean, this is something, okay, I think for psychotherapy and whatnot, people took Heidegger and basically did that and like turned it into various forms of psychotherapy, existential psychotherapy. And I think in a way he's giving this, it's a methodological sort of statement where he's saying, I'm not going to do this exactly right here. My project is this fundamental ontology, and I'm only talking about, the existential analysis of Dasein in so much as I can get to the fundamental ontology, but along the ways of giving the structure of Dasein, there's then what about these more particular existential, empirical, more the chief features of Dasein? He's saying that would be this other task, a thematic existential or existential anthropology. So I took it as something like that.
Yeah,
In a way, he's kind of saying, he's kind of like trying to give himself some leeway and being like, I'm not going to say everything here. Yeah.
because it almost seemed to me like to approach it from an anthropological standpoint, which is often confused for Wittgensteinian principles. It's almost like it's saying that you can provide a situation for some type of blueprint for an authentic experience, which is not what he's doing. He seems to be laying out the theme that potentiality in and of itself is more important than actuality.
I thought he was just suggesting that you need to understand Dasein as potentiality as such before you can start answering questions about, actuality. So I'm not, well, maybe more important. I was thinking more important only in the sense that it's kind of a priori. It's like you've got to understand what Dasein is as potentiality for being and understand authenticity in that whole framework. Once you got the ontology down, that's prior to then looking at practical anthropology where you're starting. So I guess I'm thinking not more important in any absolute sense, but prior to, it's like prior to that.
No, I guess I read it as like authentic design like creates the situations in and of itself. Like there is no blueprint. There's no background for an authentic existence. The actual the actual experience of authentic design provides that for you, and you can't really atomize it, to break it down to from an anthropological standpoint of, well, this is the authentic being. Like I think the existential component is that at its core, our possibilities are more important than what we actually can do or what we've done. And anthropology seems to focus on that.
Um, 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 when you look at the, I was trying to think back to my anthropology classes because early anthropology had differences. So Anglo-American anthropology in the 1800s, before it was affected by Franz Boas, was looking at general how local cultures were a reflection of general cultural evolution. And so this is where you get what looks to us somewhat ridiculous: barbarism, culture, civilization decline, all caps, capital D, capital C, capital B, right? And the Germans were different. They were looking at a spatial consideration, geographic distribution of cultural traits. And it was because of Boas's influence in the United States that it's an older term now that I'm not sure is being used, but the phrase culture areas, right? And almost think of families of cultures like we think of language families. We think Germanic, Romance, things like that. Well, the anthropologists from the German tradition would be looking at family resemblances, so to speak, but idea of cultural contact, distribution of cultural traits, things like that. And so when with Heidegger using anthropology, I would think it would be. I think German anthropology would be congenial to, at least from what all you were saying today and earlier, because didn't I don't remember where, but didn't Heidegger already discuss the horizon? The idea of a horizon, which is kind of like a limit, but one that's not static. Maybe I'm pushing too far with the anthropology thing, but I thought it from what you all have been saying about Heidegger for the last 15 years of this seminar, I thought that it was connected to a Germanic sense of anthropology.
And I think more generally, I posted a different definition of Britannica, but very generally, anthropology is the study of humanity, I guess, in its historical and cultural concreteness, which at least for like Kant would include a study of practical ethics. So I think anthropology, and maybe this is consistent with what you're saying, but my understanding of anthropology, or in a philosophical context, is less like the way we think about anthropology. Like if you go to the anthropology department in our university, they're going to be looking at ruins and I think anthropology as the study of humanity is pretty broad, but it's more the study of the concrete conditions and the concrete cultural manifestations of humanity, something like that.
Well, that's my point, though, Nevitt, about, remember this book, when was it published? 1927. And so, and I don't remember Heidegger's birth year, but what I mean is, what you're saying is true. But if you were looking at anthropology in the 1870s, 1880, Henry Louis Morgan, a lot of the early so-called founders, it is, at least in the Anglo-American tradition, it would look different from what we think of as anthropology today, which basically so much of the field became dominant by more German ideas, which fits into what you're saying. And also the practicality. I mean, actually doing field work and being in a village, right? But instead of going to the village and to say, "Oh, you're villagers here. You're a part of an earlier cultural form," but rather look at all of the ideational and material artifacts of their culture and just to try to get a sense of diffusion, right? Like where did these things come from? How widely were they diffused? What seems to be adapted from other things? Does that make sense? And so, and that's why I think that Heidegger is very much connected to that in what y'all are talking about.
There's a footnote. I assume it's Heidegger's footnote, so it's probably in both traditions. But right after that, a thematic existential anthropology. Karl Jaspers explicitly conceived and carried out the task of a doctrine of worldviews for the first time in the direction of this problematic. What man is here questioned and determined in terms of what one can essentially be. So I take that that's what he means. What man is, a doctrine of worldviews, something like that.
I think within the phrase like a doctrine of worldviews or like in an anthropological study, like the philosophical anthropology that you described in the chat. Um, I guess I mean I feel like that I think is part and parcel of like Heidegger's larger like his kind of constant emphasis on like historicizing, on locating, on like the there-ness and the thusness and the here-ness and the now-ness, you know, and uh, locating things within like an epistemological horizons that is conditioned by like factical circumstances. So like I feel like yeah, the only way to talk about anybody, I think that's what I guess I don't know if that's been said in more like I guess it has been, and this has already been said, you know, more or less, but it feels like that like for Heidegger, it's like the only way to talk about like particular people in a way that's like sensible or constructive would be like sort of anthropology, um, because it'd have to take into consideration like this whole sort of broader network that they are in, the Dasein in which they are. Or I don't know how they would say like how Heidegger would place the person into the Dasein's same situation, but I don't know. Either way, yeah. And I think that that has its merit. I think that that sort of you know, constant emphasis on the epistemological horizon of understanding has its merit, but it leaves open certain questions. Like I've talked to Chase about everybody. I guess sometimes it's like you know what it leaves me curious about like the status of things like that are ontically generated outside of the ontological horizon of any Dasein. And it's like Heidegger kind of talks about that sometimes. I've seen in like little footnotes and stuff. It's like, this is kind of weird. This is weird. You know, it's not clear. It's the status of these is still, you know, it's kind of constitutively so or something. You know, whatever. So it's got its, you know, limits, of course, for anybody. But it's yeah, it is what it is. Anyway.
Well, the reason like I was saying that for I feel like anthropology is context and situations where for him on page 282 of the Stanbaugh, he says that this is the bottom of 282 on section 295. Seriousness is no less possible in the vulgar experience of conscience than is a lack of seriousness in a more primordial understanding of conscience. Still, the existentially more primordial interpretation also discloses possibilities of a more primordial existential understanding, as long as our ontological concepts do not get cut off from the ontic experience. So it seems like from an anthropological standpoint, you're never really experiencing Dasein. You're just trying to provide a context or an actuality of Dasein, whereas he's saying primordially from an existential framework, our conscience is what is tied to potentiality or possibility. And like later, I think in section, what section is this? I can't remember. This is on 287, where he's talking about situations where this resoluteness comes into play. And it almost seems like situations are kind of defined by an individual's thrownness and expression of his or her authenticity. Because he says on 287, situation is the there disclosed in resoluteness, as which the existing being is there. It is not an objectively present framework in which Dasein occurs or into which it could even bring itself. Far removed from any objectively present mixture of the circumstances and accidents encountered, situation is only through and in resoluteness.
Which is, I think, important to point out. It's not a situation that is the occasion for resoluteness, but the other way around is resoluteness, which is the occasion for being situated.
Yeah.
So what it confuses, here's one thing that confuses me. That passage that Joseph just read, it is not an objectively present framework. So this is the very bottom of Heidegger 299, top of 300. Situation is the there disclosing a resoluteness as which is existence being there. It is not an objectively present framework in which Dasein occurs or into which it could even bring itself. Far removed from any objectively present mixture of the circumstances and accidents encountered, situation is only through and in resoluteness. So like Eric said, resoluteness is the condition for a situation to arise. But then on the facing page on Heidegger 299, this is kind of in the middle of the paragraph that starts on Heidegger 298 and continues on to 299. Resoluteness means letting oneself be summoned out of one's lostness in the they. The irresoluteness of the they nevertheless remains dominant, but it cannot challenge resolute existence, which seems to repeat that kind of notion, that kind of that situation where the they is always there and everything's just a modification of it. So it's like resoluteness is a modification of irresoluteness. As the counter concept to existentially understood resoluteness, irresoluteness does not refer to an ontic psychical quality in the sense of being burdened with inhibition, so it's not a psychological state. Even resolutions are dependent upon the they and its world. Understanding this is one of the things that resolution discloses, insofar as resoluteness first gives to Dasein its authentic transparency. In resoluteness, Dasein is concerned with its own most potentiality of being that, as thrown, can project itself only upon definite factical possibilities. Resolution does not escape from reality, but first discovers what is factically possible in such a way that it grasps it as it is possible as one's own most potentiality of being in the they. The existential definiteness of possible resolute Dasein includes the constitutive moments of the existential phenomenon, which we've hitherto passed over, that we now call situation. And so what I find a little confusing here is the relation between resoluteness and situation, like on the, at the end, at the bottom of Heidegger 299, that where I just read, it's not an objectively present framework in which Dasein occurs or into which it could bring itself. So it's not an objectively present framework. Yet in this section, he's saying that resoluteness always has to grapple with the factical possibilities that Dasein encounters in the situation. And I'm having a hard time putting those two together, because the one seems to say, these are these sort of abstract ontological structures, and that you can't really objectify them. You can't cash them out. It seems like he was saying you can't cash them out into ontic possibilities. The situation is not a collection of concrete features of the world. It seems like he's saying. But then he also says resoluteness can project itself only upon definite factical possibilities. It doesn't escape from reality, but first discovers what is factically possible in such a way that it grasps its possibilities in the they. And so I'm having a hard time putting together. Maybe it's just the tension is only in my own mind, but it seems like on one hand he's talking about a situation in terms of, Dasein can only project itself upon the factical possibilities that are present in Dasein's world. And he seems to be associating that with the word situation. But then right after that, he says, but situation is not an objective set of conditions or something. And those seem to be in tension with me. I can't figure out, what am I missing there? Did I make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to go, Eric?
Oh, I was just going to say real quickly. I mean, I think the stressing on it's not an objective presence. It's following that, emphasizing on that distinction once again between like ready to hand and present to hand, and the situation that that resoluteness engenders is not one of present to hand things, but one of being in a world of interworldly things.
So one question I have, this is general, when he talks about present at hand versus ready to hand, I always have to remember which is which. So present at hand is the one that Steinbach talks about as objective presence.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not, resoluteness is not, or situation is not objectively present or not present at hand. But does that mean, so one thing I'm wondering, this can be something objectively present or present at hand when I think of it as this object that's broken out of its context of usability and all that. But can conditions in the world that are not things also be objectively present? So, goals, objectives, intentions, like I'm going to go apply for a job here. Can that be objectively present? Because when he says the situation is not an objectively present framework, I guess what I'm wondering, what does that mean?
Yeah. So the way I took that is, so the situation, it seems like that is, so when Dasein becomes super authentic and resolute, then it's the disclosure of its openness onto the world, that is then the situation. So the situation is kind of what is there when you are resolute or kind of acting within the scope of your own most potentialities, instead of having the the they self and the public interpreted possibilities decided for you or really restricted for you. So the situation would be something like, these are existential spatiality disclosed to me, but with those possibilities that are my own most and authentic. So that would include all kinds of things, any number of possibilities for, I guess, a kind of action in some way. So this would be this would include, I think, these dealings in the world that would be fall within the scope of the ready to hand and whatnot, but not as it's that's not what it's necessarily it would involve that, but it's not composed of that. So what he's saying, I think with this, where he's saying it's not about a present at hand mixture of circumstances and accidents which we encounter. So he's saying those factical possibilities that are disclosed in this situation, which is, space disclosed, that's my being and my possibilities, my authentic possibilities. But it can't be reduced to those specific things that are involved with the possibilities. So I'm struggling to get, if I give an example, it'll just sound like stupid, but I don't know. Let's go for it.
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try an example while you're talking because it came through like a little bit. So when I say that, like when I think of a situation where emotions are high, I can list to you the facts of the objects at hand and the projects, but it doesn't necessarily give you an indication of the human situation where my emotions were high. I can say dishes, I can say fork, I can say, a puppy pad, but you don't know what that is. I have to have a human situation where all of the possibilities that I'm listing have a meaning to me that I'm expressing in that situation that's authentic. Just a bare listing of facts and context doesn't give you that human definition of a situation. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, I think it is something like that where, okay, so with my possibilities and being in this situation, you can't reduce those possibilities down to a collection of things that are kind of loosely involved with it, because possibilities, these are just have to be disclosed as possibilities, which then have to deal with the design for which it is possible for and possible as some existential activity of its own. So it can't be about, even if something with the possibility ends up being about, I could possibly do something like go back to school and get a degree or something like that. He's saying it's not, okay, the situation isn't then this factual statement about it has to do with the college, the university, the degree program. It's not, that is not the situation. The situation has to do with that particular existing Dasein and those possibilities that are disclosed for that particular Dasein as possibilities.
Yeah,
It's like a fucking thesis.
but I mean, that's a good example that you brought up that made it finally kind of make sense to me because I was maybe like how I'm thinking about is like trying to put it in terms of my own life. There was a point where it was a real positive, I I had dropped out of school. I wasn't on the college track. There was a point where going back to college was like this alive possibility that kind of was like authentic to me at that moment. And now it's like theoretically possible I could go back, and get another degree, but it doesn't feel like coherent in the like wider set of meanings as to my life now. Even though it's like theoretically possible, it's not a concrete like authentic possible. It doesn't feel authentic to me now as a avenue. It's been closed off since when I was 25 and the conditions that were at work there or whatever. Is that what you're getting at, or am I misunderstanding you?
Yeah. Although I would add that, so even if it does become so that you end up taking action, I think out of your situation that, disclosing these authentic possibilities, and then you end up taking action on it and kind of choosing one thing or whatnot. even then you can't kind of retrogressively. I'm not saying, Matthew, you're doing this necessarily, but as a general caution, still at the same time, we can't think that okay, well, then the situation was just these particular possibilities as actualities. And we can say that there's just this kind of aggregate of actions that you can do. Because I think the situation is about this indeterminate openness of multiple possibilities that don't really have, they're not even really numerically distinct so much. And it's kind of like that disclosure of, okay, let's throw in some existentialism here. Kind of this freedom of openness to my own existential possibilities. That's really what that situation is. And it's disclosed so, my spatiality as this existing thing, it's always in this there, which is always open to a world, and it's always has these cloud of possibilities that I could possibly do as part of my freedom. I think that's kind of what the situation is. And
But sorry.
okay, yeah, no, good.
But then I was going to, again, kind of in the middle of Heidegger 299, I read this before. In resoluteness, so this is near the bottom of the paragraph that starts on 299. In resoluteness, Dasein is concerned with its own most potentiality of being that, as thrown, can project itself only upon definite factical possibilities. So, I mean, that's kind of what's confusing me. And it's right at the end of that same paragraph, just a few sentences later, where he says, the existential definiteness of possible resolute Dasein includes the constitutive moments of the existential phenomenon, which we have hitherto passed over, that we call situation. So that's what's confusing me, is he's bringing in, as I guess, as a concrete factical Dasein in a particular period of history, in a particular culture, in a particular blah, 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 I only have certain factical possibilities available to me. And somehow that limitation of possibility seems to be in some way addressed by the word situation. So that's what's confusing me.
I think, okay, so when the situation, this disclosedness of the there, but according to these almost possibilities, that still doesn't mean that, there's still, okay, the thrown element and facticity does have to do with this kind of particularity about you as a particular Dasein. That's my own most possibilities, and not, God forbid, like Hunter's possibilities that, I mean, I'm just messing with you, Hunter. But
Don't start stuff you can't finish here. So
it's really was I love Hunter, that I wanted to use him as an example for things like that.
but you don't argue with Hegelians. You know this. So go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, I'm a Hegelian myself now too.
Oh,
That's actually a recent development, but maybe we can get to that later.
What?
But I'm maybe being slightly facetious, maybe. Okay, now it's brought up. I've been reading some of the science of logic, and I think it's amazing. I'll just say that. I'll leave it there. But yeah, it's great. Hegel is, yeah, he's been on my mind recently. And okay, one fun thing is trying to get through one sentence of quoting Hegel to your family without them interrupting and being like, "What the hell?" It's really difficult. I tried. But yeah. Okay. So anyways, situation. Yeah, definite factical possibilities. So yeah, I think it's that your own most it has to do with there's a particularity to the Dasein that has only I can't do absolutely anything. It's not some kind of, well, I don't know, like crazy new agey like parallel universes of infinite possibility, something like that. It's like this concrete situatedness. So I think that's what it has to do with on that level, but also that ultimately what you end up doing is, you know, definite things, even if that situation always discloses itself also in an indefinite manner according to the particular uh actualities of what you would do. Because he talks about there's a, I think it's an existential indefiniteness that goes along with the existential definiteness.
Well, so I mean, it seems like an example of this might be. I mean, there's the extreme examples, like you said, this kind of new agey. I'll go into another universe right now or something. But even a more concrete, example might be like I could say I want to become the next president of the United States. Like I'm almost 35. Like I could, like in the way anyone who's 35, there's certain requisites by, the whatever the Constitution, blah blah. But like there's no real scenario where like that's in the cards for me, like and so there's this kind of like this they dimension that's kind of like, even if that's like technically possible, it's not, existentially possible, given the way I've lived my life, etc. I mean, is that kind of what we're getting at? Or am I just confusing it with something else? I'm trying to get a grip on what we're talking about.
Okay, I'm officially announcing Matthew for president. Let's make it
I'd vote
happen.
for him.
No.
I'd vote for him.
I got 2 votes at least.
He's a lot better than our current possibilities.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would definitely vote for Matthew over our current possibilities. Yeah. But so I do think that's relevant. And that, yeah, okay, it's logically possible that you could, you're not disqualified from this certain possibility. But I think that has to do with, okay, action through time that eventually you have to decide upon, I guess, one course of thing or another. That would have to be, that's ultimately a possibility then that you would project you'd project yourself onto this definite factual possibility and understand yourself through that possibility. If you decided to actually choose it, but you don't have the will or inclination to do that, so that's not really, and I don't think that's who knows, maybe that's your ultimate authentic projection of just I don't that'd be interesting. I once met a crazy person who was telling me he was gonna run for president, and as he was doing this, he was like writing on a Bible about all of his campaign, and I still have the Bible too. And then he got kicked out of the bookstore because he started yelling at the speaker that I was there for. Oh God, it was fun. So I think that was maybe that was his authentic possibility there, but it wasn't to actually succeed. But anyways, I'm getting distracted. Okay. Yeah, so the situation, it has to do with these possibilities as possibilities, but part of that has to include, though, this some kind of definite factical dimension to it. So I don't know. I definitely see, Nivet, what you're saying when there's a tension there. I mean, it makes sense that the situation is kind of like disclosedness of your total possibilities as authentic ownmost. Um, but then it also makes sense that that isn't something completely indefinite because your ownmost has to do still with some definite range of different possibilities. And all this has to be done without reducing these possibilities to something that would destroy their character as possibilities, which I think that's kind of like a making them, if you turn them into something that's kind of present at hand, even as an understanding like that, I think that would be something like that too. Because that situation, if it's disclosing it as your possibilities, then it's not disclosing it as something that is something just objectively present. Because then it would not be part of Dasein's being.
Yeah, there I think okay, so I mean you could maybe think of like scenarios where like if you're deluding yourself, you know, one sometimes can uh like point to all kinds of concrete things that are happening in their life to justify, you know, an inauthentic project. I'm thinking of trying to think of concrete examples, but you could imagine like um if you're an alcoholic, you know, being like, well, you know, it's like I I had to drink because I was out with my friends. You know, maybe this is a bad example, but that would be an example where you're kind of laying out a scenario in your mind that is objectively verifiable, uh, but it's not authentic to your what's actually going on. Not that I know he's not wanting to psychologize it so much with like this notion of an alcoholic, but maybe at least that might be a form of it. But is maybe that is something. I don't know.
Well, and to go on what you said and what Chase is saying on 281 in the Stambaugh translation, this is 281 right above the 294 section, middle of the page. He says, and this is where he's talking about the good and bad conscience. He says, as little as the good conscience can be placed in the service of Phariseeism, just as little may the function of the bad conscience be reduced to pointing out indebtedness that are objectively present or to repressing possible ones, as if Dasein were a household whose indebtedness only needed to be balanced out in an orderly way for the self to be able to stand by as a uninvolved spectator as these experiences run their course. That to me was really powerful because he's doing this project of individuation which is tied to the they self. And I think he's laying the groundwork for this ontological structure in time, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I think he's approaching that. And what's really interesting about this is it's not a blueprint. There is an authentic self who has I don't know how to describe it that your possibilities along with your actuality are meaningful. They're not arbitrary. And that's really fascinating to me. And the human component, your particular design in your sense of care is what creates that situation or gives it its weight. And that's where the situation is created. It's not a checklist, it's not a blueprint, it's not objects as hands. Your individual Dasein that's individuated with your intensity of care is what creates that situation. And it makes both your actualities and your potentialities meaningful, which is pretty cool. And also, it filled me with dread reading it because I was like, oh shit, temporality. Did I make the right choice?
That's maybe part of my I don't like that's part of why I don't like reading Nietzsche or Heidegger is that they make me feel uh bad for sitting in my chair and drinking beer for many hours. And Hegel doesn't do that. He just kind of prattles on about whatever, and I can just he would be fine with me sitting here and just listening to him all day.
Maybe that's
He
what we
doesn't.
need, Hunter. Just more weed, and then all of this will make much more sense.
Yeah, maybe and fuck, I wish I could break the stereotype that William James set up, but whatever. Um, but yeah. Anyway, I agree with the core of what you said, by the way. That situatedness. Well,
I'm wondering if there's an analogy here with the present at hand versus ready to hand that he went through a long time ago, since in that that passage that I'm stuck on, he's saying the situation is not this objectively present kind of thing. I'm wondering if there's an analogy there. So, if I'm I'll just use woodworking because Heidegger likes woodworking because my son's turned our garage into a wood shop. So, if you're in there doing woodworking, then there's all these tools that are there. But when I'm engaged, which actually I don't do, but if I were engaged in the activity of woodworking, there would be all these ready to hand things that are just sort of extensions of my activity that I just use and I'm involved with that without really thinking about it. But then if I come back in and want to do an inventory of all the tools in the shop, then I have to think of them sort of as present at hand things. This is a hammer and this is a thing, or maybe like my son built this elaborate system on the wall for putting tools in the right place. So screwdrivers go here because they're screwdrivers, and hammers go here, and so on. But at that point, I'm no longer experiencing them as ready to hand tools that are just part of my work environment. I'm wondering if there's something similar to that going on with this situation. So I was trying to find what Matthew said earlier. Matthew said, maybe when you list your potential goals out, it's present at hand versus actively engaging in them. And I'm wondering if maybe there's a parallel there to the tools, that there's all these factical possibilities, and I have a limited set of factical possibilities. I mean, one, frankly, that's becoming more and more obvious to me is that as I'm getting older, when I was young, when I was you get the age of you guys, I felt like I had this almost infinite field of possibilities. Like, God, there was so much out there. I could do this, I could do that, I could go here, I could go there. As I get older, that field of possibilities begins to get more and more constrained. And so there's a more limited set of possibilities. But so Chase, what I was wondering is if maybe there's a parallel between, like the ready to hand present at hand in a workshop and the situation, treating it as a present at hand collection of, I could do this, I could do that, here's something I could do, there's something I could do, as opposed to a situation, this existential situation in which these possibilities have more of a ready to hand character. But I don't really know what that means for possibilities to have more of a ready to hand character. Maybe
I do
it's
think that's
a
right.
bad analogy. I don't know.
I think that's right. So the definite factical possibilities, I think those are, I'm not sure I would say that those specifically are, say, they're definitely not simply ready to hand. Well, so in the old translation, equipment, which I think in the Standby is some useful things, which is a terrible translation. Okay, I have to say also the objectively present terrible translation. I think that's why trying to follow the president hand stuff, because it's not in the Stambot translation. No wonder it's hard. Like, and I think the way that the M&R translation, it's at least it's showing that there's something kind of very specifically Heideggerian going on with that. It's like a specific ontological mode that he's talking about, rather than just kind of like, oh, just objectively present stuff. It's kind of like, okay, yeah. But anyways, so the ready to hand, that has to do with, the world of the Dasein is concerned about, its world, where it has all these different, for the sake of which, that has to do with this network of relevance, significance, in which it can do those things that it is motivated to do because it is care. So those possibilities are constituted within that nexus. Although usually so inauthentic Dasein is usually lost within those and has those, and it sort of interacts with those through the lens of the public interpretation of them. But I think it's still the same thing that is ultimately has to do with those. That's what those possibilities are. It has to do with that. What is it? For the sake of which, yeah, so there's the totality of involvements goes back to the forsake of which, and on the understanding of such a forsake of which is based in turn the understanding of significance as the disclosedness of the current world. In seeking shelter, sustenance, livelihood, we do so for the sake of constant possibilities of Dasein, which are very close to it. That's on 297. And so constant possibilities of Dasein that are for the sake of which, and that for the sake of which, ultimately they're composed. That's what makes up the whole nexus of significance and involvements that make up a world. So I think that ready to hand is kind of composed of those possibilities, and those are that's the relatively definite possibilities of those for the sake of whiches. But something like okay, if I'm building something for sustenance and shelter, that would be different from a kind of listing of the different things in the workshop. Like there's a hammer. Well, is the hammer a possibility? Like, no, it's not really, but it's involved with it. But yeah. Yeah, sorry, I had to feed the fox. Well, I already fed it, so I left a bunch of food out. And so I saw the fox. Well, the foxes have multiplied recently. Literally, there's wait, what are they? Kids or kits or cubs, whatever a baby fox is called. I can't remember. Cubs, or they're called like kids or kit. Yeah, it's a kit. Yeah. So there's those, and there's a whole family now. So they know that we've got chicken hearts and all this stuff. And my parents are out of town, so I'm in charge of doing this. I had to leave out food because I saw one like jumping around. Then by the time I got there, it was already gone. So I left all this food, and it sat there, so to see if it was eating. And indeed, something ate it, this tray, and then knocked the tray down underneath the porch. So I had to go and retrieve it. And yeah, okay, that's what I was doing. Just in case there's some kind of factical judgment about how I'm actualizing my possibilities here and my being guilty. So I am guilty, but not in an ontic manner. Because it wasn't my fault. It was the damn fox's fault. All right, done with that.
You're
Glad we
like
cleared,
blaming your
glad we cleared
surroundings.
that up. Yeah.
You're blaming the surroundings. You're escaping into the they self by blaming it on the fox.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's within my authentic possibilities, though. So, but by saying that, I think I've now lapsed into the idle chatter they self. But hey, authenticity has to kind of like operate within the potentiality for being in the they. So maybe something else is still going on there. But okay. But no, more seriously though, I think those lines about so one thing that I'm actually I mean, there's multiple things I'm interested in with this book, but um so the what I wrote an essay on and still would like to know more about has to do with this relation with what exactly is going on with, say, authenticity and then the relation with the they. And here, so normally inauthenticity, lost in the they self and the public interpretation, and all that. That's our normal existential mode, fallenness, falling prey. And then there's a modification of that inauthenticity. And for once, he kind of goes into some of the details of that, exactly what that modification is, which it's resoluteness. And he even talks about it as a mode, or if you're paying attention with Spinoza, a mode is a modification. Um, so yeah, that part was rather interesting, although it's still somewhat mysterious because you're still acting within the they, which I guess would be the fact that it has to do with this being with others at the same time, and also within the whole nexus of significance of something meaning something within this world, this common world. But yeah, I thought that part was interesting, so that you act authentically, but through the they, which is still something like a inherently, or I guess for for the most part, it is a inauthentic, uh, has to do with it inauthentic structure, fallenness of Dasein, but still you act within the they, even to do something authentic, it seems like. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm not sure.
this is I read this earlier, but this is a few sentences down at the top of Heidegger 299, just a little ways down. Just to emphasize what you were saying, resoluteness means letting oneself be summoned out of one's lostness in the they. The irresoluteness of the they nevertheless remains dominant, but it cannot challenge resolute existence. So I don't know what that means, but that, I mean, it just emphasizes what you were saying. He says the irresoluteness of the they nevertheless remains dominant. And yet, nevertheless, somehow resoluteness means letting one's self be summoned out of one's lostness in the they.
I don't know if this is relevant to what was just said. I think it might be, but I want to say I appreciated one of the points that Heidegger's is kind of trying to make here is that even in his conception of authentic being, we don't exclude the being with others. So it's not like, be yourself, be your identity. And what that consists in is not giving a fuck about anybody else, not being social. You know what I mean? Like being a lone wolf and not having any social ties. That's what genuine authenticity looks like. I think one of the points he's making is to kind of bring that conception down. You know what I mean? Even in your most authentic, you're still being with others.
I haven't been able to, I've been looking for it. I can't find the passage, but in this reading for this week, he says, in fact, that in authenticity, Dasein, if I remember right, frees others for authentic being as well. I mean, so there is an authentic mode of being with others, as you say. I can't find that passage, but he does say that.
And I think part of what Chase was interrogating as well is like this is yet kind of unresolved. It seems to be laid out, I don't know, a bit mysteriously, that the call of conscience like reaches to us in our state of fallenness, right? It being lost in idle chatter or the they. There's something, I want to say Heidegger is kind of, the way he's laying it out, to my mind at least, is it's not a transcendent beyond that's calling, but something that shows up imminently within our experiences of being in the they self, right? That can hearken us, or hearken and call us out of that and towards a more authentic. So it seems to be that there's some gap or lack, or the inauthenticity of the they self inevitably discloses itself in its inauthenticity and indicates the negative authenticity as an alternative. But there's some relationship here between inauthenticity and authenticity, which begs the question, like what modes of inauthenticity would disclose or prompt a more a turn to authenticity, or an openness to wanting to feel conscience, or what the ways he's doing it. It seems to be something embedded in culture and history ultimately, which more or less, to a greater or lesser degree, allows for various opportunities of authenticity to open up. And that to me, that question is precisely kind of what he was indicating with that comment at the end that Hunter was zeroing in on. This would be the subject of an existential anthropology. All I'm trying to indicate is that, all Heidegger's trying to indicate is that authenticity is a possibility that presents itself to us from within inauthenticity. So it somehow reaches into inauthenticity and has the potential of pulling us out. And how exactly this happens, really, you would have to do an analysis of the actual conditions. And that's kind of what I was indicating earlier with Merceau from The Stranger. To me, this is like Camus doing a kind of a little fragment, like an artistic fragment of an existential anthropology. Like, what conditions might bring somebody out of inauthentic existence and into a more authentic existence in the modern era, the world constituted today as it is. And, to his French audience, they all understand, those Arabs ain't nothing. We colonized them, and you can kill one, and then, and then yada, yada. So it's his account seems to be, to me, kind of like answering that question that Chase was kind of digging at, right? But strictly within the empirical, which I think is part of Heidegger's point. Like, if you want to understand how authentic being can be kicked out or ejected out of inauthentic being, where inauthentic being is the more almost already, where we are in our average everydayness. Like, what is it about our average everydayness that allows for this possible? Well, you have to look at the various modes of average everydayness. And for that, you would need an empirical, an anthropology.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Yeah, so the point that he makes is that it doesn't change the world. It's still the same world, and it's still the same circle of others. So, or the world which is ready to hand does not become another one in its content. I wonder if that's a Hegel reference. Nor does the circle of others get exchanged for a new one, but both one's being towards the ready to hand understandingly and concernfully, and one's solicitous being with others are now given a definite character in terms of their own most potentiality for being themselves. So that's, yeah, stressing a kind of the imminence of it's within the same world that inauthenticity and authenticity operate as long as with the same kind of existential mode of being with others. But this modification has to do, the modification of authenticity has to do with a particular kind of orientation within it, where it takes on the character of through this almost potentiality for being themselves. And then, yeah, then he's got some interesting stuff about, well, if somebody then has some kind of resolute, authentic being oneself, then they can help still operating within the mode of being with others, then help them to achieve also something like that. So that has to do with that first section that goes over the being with others, or being oneself, or whatever it's called. He talked about, there's these different modes of concern, or sorry, of care that go along with also the different structures of Dasein. So in the Iminar translation, it's being with others is solicitude, and then it's concern in the Stamba, which is very confusing because concern in the Iminar translation has to do with the interworldly entities, equipment, all that, which then in the Stamba is called taking care, which is really, really confusing because then you've got care, which is like the whole thing, Zorga. But anyways, yeah, so you're operating within that. Once there's this resolute, authentic being oneself, then they can become this actor in all these different ways, including this one that he talks about as, I think, where is it, like leaping into, yeah, this is something he talks about in that first section on this, leaping forth and liberates, yeah. Where's this whole, yeah, Dasein's resoluteness, this is on Heidegger 298. Dasein's resoluteness towards itself is what first makes it possible to let the others who are with it be in their own most potentiality for being, and to co-disclose this potentiality in the solicitude which leaps forth and liberates. When Dasein is resolute, it can become the conscience of others. Only by authentically being themselves in resoluteness can people authentically be with one another. That's pretty interesting. Yeah.
To
I
me,
think that,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that's what I think that's the passage I was thinking of earlier when, there's something about being authentic that then somehow frees others to be authentic.
to me, when I read that part, now that I remember finding that part interesting. I keep filtering stuff, like before I had talked about jazz, and for me, what it brought in my mind was like theater, like Shakespeare and stuff, and like how you can imagine a performance of Shakespeare where people are kind of going through the motions or whatever, like on a certain night, and then another night where everybody's on and the people haven't changed in the company, and the words haven't changed. Uh, and yet there's this kind of like magic in the air, and it's like infectious to the audience. And like like where I've been at a performance like that where you just feel like you're immersed in it, such that like when the actor's saying the thing, everyone in the audience is like feeling it, even though we kind of know what's gonna come. Or same with music, like um I but and so it's like this being with quality that and the performance wouldn't be possible without the audience's attention, and the audience is then kind of able to fully be an audience, like not like passively watching, but like hanging on to every word, sort of thing. But I mean, at least that's how I was interpreting it. I don't know if that's an aside, but it feels like maybe one concrete form of what he's getting at with that.
And to add a little bit to what you and Eric said, the self as he's defining it, including the authentic self, is by nature with others and thrown into the world. So authenticity doesn't seem to imply a stoic-like aesthetic existence, and it doesn't seem to imply a rigid self-assertion of your will, because often rigid individualism just makes excuses. That's an aspect of the inauthentic self where you're not owning guilt. The resoluteness in and of itself, like if we go back to the stranger, Merceau was resolute in his being towards death. He was guilty, and he knew he was guilty, and he wanted to have a conscience. It is that aspect of realizing the nature of conscience and guilt, that you have that individuation, that resolution for authentic being that's in and of itself tied with others, which is again really cool.
So that the example of from the stranger, I think is interesting because that has to do with what is the relation between all this stuff, this fundamental ontology and existential analysis and whatnot, and art and literature, whether it's music or literature or whatever. And I like the way that of thinking of it as kind of, this is literature in a way is kind of like dramatizing a certain actualization of authenticity in a way that it can disclose that in a way that maybe something where if you just give a kind of history of something, there's too much of a tendency to then kind of reduce it to the same thing that we're talking about as kind of like a present at hand list of situations or not situations, circumstances and accidents, the way that maybe kind of a matter of fact kind of history would give. But I like the way of thinking of it that literature is doing something kind of, or art or music, that they're doing something unique that still relates to what something like Heidegger is doing as well. And still also has to do with, yet is distinct from a kind of real world, becoming authentic, assuming that's even really a thing, which I'm not. I don't know, full disclosure, I guess I'm still not totally convinced by Heidegger in general, but well, let's not. We don't need negative Nancy Chase here. Let's be positive Chase. So go become authentic. No, but yeah, those relations I think are rather interesting. One thing I was thinking about was Um, so can we, there's no real way to know that someone else is authentic, really, is there? Is it which is a question because I don't really know. So can we go and like look at something in history and say, if we know this, say somebody's biography and whatnot, and say that that's authentic? Or is that itself something kind of like a that would take away this what is essential, which is kind of seeing it through these singular possibilities for a particular Dasein. And if we turn it into a kind of retrospective, talking about the facts of their situation, it no longer becomes this existential situation, but uh, instead a kind of factual history. I don't know is if that's I mean they seem intention to me, but I don't really know. Yeah.
I'm tempted to say that something like Tolstoy's War and Peace is an attempt to sketch out a something like an authentic situation in that, if that book is all about the relationships between the people and their how this war impacts each aspect of every person. It's not these historical facts are all shot through it, but the focus is on the human impact of these world events. On the other hand, it seems that Tolstoy had a kind of particular philosophy of history that he is implicitly arguing for in the way he structures the story. So,
Well, you don't want to listen to Pierre talk for 200 pages about historical determinism, because to me, that's the most fascinating part.
well, I thought that stuff was fascinating too, but what I was suggesting is that maybe there's at least something of a existential situation at play there because of the way he talks about he talks about very detailed experiences of, and how it impacts these different people across these different social strata and all of that. So,
Yeah, it is, and you're right. I'm sorry, I was being a little sardonic because I love War and Peace. I just had a hard time slogging through it sometimes because number one, the family names are hard to get, but like the aspect of like Pierre sharing a potato as a prisoner with another fellow prisoner in the cold, that was that aspect of that literature was so powerful, and you can't just get that from a purely historic reading of the Napoleonic era and how it impacted different people. So I absolutely agree with you.
maybe another example, maybe, I don't know, is if you think about oh God, what's the novel? Damn it, even the authors.
Story of the Eye.
No, 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 no. I'm thinking of God, why can I not remember this guy's the liberal or the probably socialist American writer that wrote about the Dust Bowl stuff.
Oh, John Steinbeck, The Great
Steinbeck,
Wrath.
Yeah.
The Grapes of Wrath, yeah. And I think it's the great. I don't remember which novel when the one he's describing the Dust Bowl and the family
Yeah.
that's traveling to California.
Yeah, the Jode family. It's the
Joe
Great
family.
Wrath.
Yeah, and so here you have a historical situation, and granted, he's got an axe to grind politically, but you have this story of these people and the impact of these people in that situation. And toward the end of the book, I mean, this has been a long time since I read it, so Eric or somebody tell me if I mischaracterized this, but there's this man who's like starving, and I have this recollection of this young mother letting him suckle on her breast.
Yes.
That,
Yeah.
I mean, that had an incredible emotional impact on me. I mean, it just completely floored me. And it hit me in this way that it brought home the conditions that these people were in a way that no description or set of statistics or anything like that could. I mean, it just hit me, not just in the gut. I mean, it was like, my emotions, my body. I mean, it was incredible. And I'm wondering if something like that, maybe comes closer to a situation, fleshing out a situation rather than just treating as a bunch of facts.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The all those examples like Tolstoy and Grapes of Wrath and whatnot, because it's kind of okay. So one thing that what's called the origin of the work of art, Heidegger's slightly later treatise on art talks about. So I can't remember a lot of it. Or one thing is that he focuses on the artist as this uh someone who discloses different worlds. So I think that is the way that the artist kind of gets to manufacture a whole world. That kind of, and you have this sort of, it's not about whether it's true or not. Instead, you're kind of, as a reader, say, you kind of have to take it uh, as it is. And I think with that, the way that you can construct these different elements of a story and a world, a fictional world, then you can give like a full situation in a way to at least be able to disclose something existential about Dasein. Where I'm not sure if that would be, I mean, it makes sense that maybe you could have something like a situation of different choices within a novel that would then have to do with authenticity or whatnot. I'm not sure, but it definitely makes sense that there's something about literature that can disclose, because you can almost have like a certain kind of like closure within a fictional world. You can disclose something existential about humans or Dasein or whatnot. Where if I'm giving like a factual history, maybe it's always kind of like, oh well, we don't know about that. It's like becomes like a epistemological question almost.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I think also this mode of revealing all this is, expressed in religious traditions. Like I think part of what Heidegger, an implication of this view that Heidegger's offering here, is that like it's almost a kind of modern trap to look at like a religious tradition, at least when it's functioning in a culture. Maybe, and maybe we can't go back to this or whatever, but when it was like a thing that the culture was based around, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or whatever, that it's almost it's a mistake to view it as like, oh, they thought they were telling history in the way that a modern person, would conceptualize history as just like, here's a bunch of data of what happened exactly. It's like, it's this whole, web of a constellation of meaning, and some of it maybe happened, some of it is mythology, but that's kind of not the point. It's like, how do I find coherence in this wider net of meaning? And then even from within that, there's room for like evolution and mutation and things like that over time. I think Heidegger's gesturing at something sort of hermeneutically, he's at least not saying that we need to go back to that, but that's a way of being a human being, at least, or a Dasein that he's trying to bring our attention to, that we kind of miss when we look at the world through this framework of just getting a catalog of like biasless information that's just kind of there,
So I wonder if that would be kind of, so that last thing you said about the factual list of things, would that also be kind of like Tolstoy's thing about historical determination. He's almost kind of like bringing that in some way as almost in contrast, I would presume to a certain degree. But because you always have to act within some kind of definite possibilities to some degree, but there's obviously, I think, like this whole milieu of thought is counter to a kind of historical determinism in a very strict sense. And I think you could disclose that with fiction. I'm actually thinking of what just reminded me of Sartre's Nausea,
Mhm.
which has some interesting things to say about history. And it's kind of it's pretty skeptical of, giving some kind of factually accurate history where it's almost like, no, that doesn't. Oh, it makes me, you know what I actually know I just realized is, okay, so Bergson has this concept of fabulation as a component within religion, that there's this way that you come up with stories within religion, and and he calls it fabulation, but the storytelling function or faculty. But then and then of course, the sort of scientific mind will look back and be like, well, this isn't, President hand factual events. This is false. That's kind of not getting exactly what the actual function of it was when it was being deployed, which is more kind of a function of being with others, even if, maybe Heidegger would say it's something inauthentic. Oh, I can't say that suddenly. Inauthentic. Oh my God, I can't say it. I've forgotten how to talk. Okay.
No, maybe
Let's
you're
just
not
forget.
supposed
Let's
to
just forget
say
all
it.
this. Oh God damn, it's recording. Inauthentic. Okay, I think I said it. Okay. Anyways, um, I wonder if Sartre though was influenced by Bergson's idea about fabulation and history and whatnot. I don't know. I know Sartre was influenced by Bergson to first become a philosopher, and then, like many people, tried to distance himself from Bergson. So I don't know. Got my bingo card out of the way. At least one spot.
My authentic self has to go to bed. That's where I'm gonna head shortly. I have to feed these ladies their ducky soupy. Yes, I do. I do. I do.
Sorry,
Yeah,
real
Matt.
quickly, Chase, your comment like inspired. I don't know, just thought I'd share this out loud. I don't even know why. What, like again, it's a common trope in philosophy. Like a lot of times, students have to distance themselves from their master or, from their teacher who they learned from. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, why was it that so many in that generation felt the need to distance themselves from Bergson? Like I don't know Bergson well enough to see what might be offensive in his philosophy. So my first guess was like, maybe it was something not to do with his philosophy, something social. Maybe he fathered an illegitimate child. No, wait, this is France. Maybe he didn't father an illegitimate child. That's why they had to distance themselves from him.
He didn't have a mistress.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Bergson, he seems like he was just like a really nice guy.
Right. Not enough public scandal.
That lack
Yeah.
of bastard.
Can't
is
hold him
what
up
did
as can't hold him up as somebody to follow. I mean, where's the public scandal? Like
Well, yeah, compare him to Rousseau, who how many children did he
All
create
right,
and send off to an orphanage?
let's not get into the sexual proclivities of the post-constructionalist movement because we'll be here a while.
It's not about sex. Is that he didn't want to bother raising the children that he was the father of, and he just said off to the orphanage with you for the scientific experiments.
Okay, I have to. Okay, to give a sort of a Nietzschean defense of that, in order to be great at Rousseau, he had to do his Rousseau thing. He couldn't be stopped by having to go, you know, take care of a bunch of screaming mouths.
Wow.
You know, so you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet.
Okay, there we go.
So yeah, I definitely agree. A lot of philosophers are assholes, but I think there's a lot of great things that are created basically because we have to let people be assholes to a certain degree.
Maybe they were authentic assholes.
Authentic, I like that. My favorite is the Bataille Lacan love triangle. That was a good one. That's a good one.
I don't remember who said it or asked it in the chat, but Bergson's mother and his mother was English Jewish, and his father came from a rich Polish Jewish family.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I thought. I know that some people who we might be reading or have read may or may not have distanced themselves from Bergson partly because of that. I didn't know.
Yeah. That's yeah.
All right. Y'all, I'm going to bed. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks for the help, guys. I appreciate it.
Likewise.
See you later.
Good night, everybody.
No,